Hello everybody and welcome to the latest in the series of webinars from NBS. I'm delighted to say that we have a fantastic panel for all of you today. As usual, there's an opportunity for you to ask questions and we'll try and get to as many of those questions as we can at the end of this session. This particular webinar is going to cover four main topics. We're going to talk a little bit about the unprecedented times and the way that organizations have approached collaborative working in the cloud. We're going to talk a little bit about the digital future of the industry and some of the challenges that the industry might face and how we can solve those challenges. We'll get into a little bit more detail when we talk about the golden thread and the activity that's coming post-Grenfell. And last but absolutely not least, we're going to talk about sustainable outcomes. We still have another crisis looming beyond COVID, and that is the sustainability crisis, the environmental challenge that we all are facing. Before we get into those, let me introduce the panel to you, and I'm going to ask them just to talk about themselves just in a few words. So I'm going to go round from what for me is top left and round. So we're going to start with Neal Thompson. Neal, do you just want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Neal Thompson. I'm Director at Atkins. I head up information management and digital twin capability for UK and Europe in Atkins. Also currently seconded to the Centre of Digital Built Britain, where I'm leading their Construction Innovation Hub programme. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Neal. Daniel.
Excellent. Yeah, so welcome everyone. Daniel Woods from Autodesk. I'm a technical specialist. I focus on the building design segment of the business, and my background's in architecture, so it's great to be on this webinar.
Thank you. Stephen.
Yeah, hi everybody, I'm Stephen Hamel, Innovation Director at MBS. I've been with MBS now for over 20 years.
Wonderful, thank you. Very short and sweet. David.
Mute.
David, we're on mute, I'm afraid.
Yeah, no, just spotted that. Hi, I'm David Miller from David Miller Architects. We're a small to medium-sized architecture practice based primarily in London with a small satellite office in Liverpool, and we do a broad range of very typical architecture projects.
Thank you, David. Nigel.
Hello everybody, I'm Nigel Blacklog. I'm the Technical Director for Bauder, so we're flat roofing specialists. So I've been involved with MBS for over 20 years now. So I'm heavily involved in all things standards, etc., to do with flat roofing.
And it should probably be said, when I was being a proper architect, Nigel and I used to work together a long, long time ago. Anyway, last but absolutely not least, we have Vicky.
Hi, I am Head of Digital for i3PT certification and Central Software as a Service, and Global Vice Chair for Women in BIM.
Fantastic. Thank you very much all. We've got a diverse range of backgrounds here in terms of certification and also previously in construction, large practice, small practice, providers and manufacturers. So I think we've got lots of expertise that can really bring out some of the challenges in each of these four topics we've been talking about. So let's start with how the industry is performing now. We are 4 months into the COVID crisis. This was a massive change for not just the construction industry, but the economy as a whole. So I wonder, David, can I start with you? How has this affected the way that you work and how have you approached that and what's worked for you?
It's been a really interesting experience, as I'm sure it has been for lots of people. What we've seen is almost there's two things going on for us. We're a very digitally enabled practice in the first place, and so we found that an awful lot of that has really come to the fore and has slotted into place. But obviously the other side is that very much what we do involves collaboration and face-to-face interaction at a micro level within the office and at a macro level within the team. And obviously that has completely changed in the space of 4 months. And if we'd effectively designed an office around a very intense mission room environment that couldn't be less COVID friendly if we tried. Everyone's around one very large desk facing each other to encourage them to communicate. So what we've seen is that effectively move into a digital environment, and trying to capture the spirit of that is been quite an interesting experience.
And Nigel, obviously, you need to be able to get in touch with all of these people. It was previously very easy because they're all in one office or in different offices within an organisation, but now they're all over the place. How have you managed to deal with that?
Well, a very important decision that the business made was that we didn't make didn't furlough any of our sales staff, and most of the way through it, they've been fully engaged. And I think basically what's happened is some digital practices that as a business we were trying to bring in slowly, suddenly happened nearly overnight. So we went paperless very quickly. Everybody now can easily use Teams, whereas before they may have tinkered around it. It's meant that we've been able to have one-to-one meetings face-to-face. Yes, there's a little bit missing there, but most people would say it's 90% of the experience, which is obviously far better than the old way of, which would have been perhaps say a telephone. And sometimes obviously email is still a little bit impersonal, so you can still sort of look somebody in the eye. So we have had change there. And I think the other practical thing out and about is big part of our business is that we inspect what work is done. We have a great number of inspectors, and we were able actually, where it became a point that they weren't traveling out, but some sites were working. Everybody now has a decent digital phone in their pocket, is the fact they can actually video what they were doing. So it wasn't that we weren't seeing it at all, and we could actually ask for a zoom in or a photo and what have you. So we were able to even inspect to a certain level through the worst period.
So Vicky, in terms of your work as well, you were looking at the digital future anyway, but has this been an easy step into home working, or and what tools have you found become useful to you?
Well, for me personally, and the team that I work with, it's all been about communication. So there are, as Nigel said there are plenty of great digital tools out there, because we do site inspections ourselves to collect that information. That exists and it's in your pocket. What is a bigger step are the human beings that sort of surround that technology. So you can use the tech, but if you don't have the right attitude and the forms of communication to support that, then your team's going to break apart and your project's going to struggle. And so a big thing that I've seen in my network, specifically in Women in BIM, actually talking to people there, has been new people who have started in teams during this pandemic, or people who have joined new projects, and feeling just completely isolated, and things like a simple chat function, and making sure that cameras are on when you're on a Zoom call rather than just talking to a black box and a name. Like those little things actually have given the most power in this scenario, rather than big sexy tech.
So Neal, is that the same for you? Are you seeing the same sorts of issues? Is it about communication?
Yeah, it's certainly interesting. I guess I'm looking at it from a different scale to my colleagues on the call, in terms of, our architecture practice is 600 strong in the UK. I think the first thing is, much like what Vicky said, I think the first step is, we've adapted very quickly to remote communication, which was quite interesting, because if we think about our behavioural personas that the stereotypical ones that we see around the office, how they've transposed into the digital world has been really interesting, about those that you'd expect to thrive and ones that don't. And it's almost as if the digital world has sort of flipped everything on its head from a behavior expectations. So I think that communication piece is really key. I guess the next two steps on is, once you've got everybody communicating, we're lifting off email, we're having more open conversations about the work that we're doing. It then made us think about the digital workflows. So, how do we start tracking progress of the work that we're doing? We can't have you know, you see around our design offices, lots of sort of post-its on the walls and lots of, you know, that work, you know, managing work in progress is sometimes could be quite messy. So it's given us an opportunity to structure that digitally, which has been really interesting, because I think an outcome of the work that, especially a lot of our organizations are doing now, especially around digital workflows, is giving us the opportunity to measure productivity in a different way. Which has been really interesting. You know, you can digitally measure the objects that you're putting into models, so you can get an idea of, you know, how many cubic meters of concrete did we place in design today, which is interesting from a productivity measure perspective. And the last one, which has been really key, is about appropriate IT infrastructure and thinking about, you know, the way that we collaborate across the industry. We're sharing very dense information, 3D models, LiDAR scans, all the metadata and all those decision makings. And, you know, these can't sit on big, expensive computers in the corner of the office. You know, transpose that to cloud, and you can't move gigabytes of data instantly from the Middle East to the UK, for example. So flipping these workflows into the cloud has been interesting as well.
Yeah.
That whole issue around cloud and collaboration, the investment in digital, because I think one thing that's come out of this, that wonderful line that COVID has actually been the biggest instigator in digital transformation that there has ever been. And cloud and collaboration become really quite fundamental to that. It's something, obviously, as MBS, we believe we've put our tools into the cloud. Daniel, in terms of Autodesk, the cloud is quite important to you as well.
Yeah, so as you might imagine, Richard, obviously, you know, we're a global software company. So, you know, over the period of the pandemic, you know, we were actually working, you know, quite easily from different locations, from like remote areas of the world. In terms of the disruption to the business, I would say it wasn't a massive disruption in terms of, you know, doing business as usual, because we do a lot of teleconference calls and sort of Zoom meetings. But what I would say is that it did allow us to, you know, sort of prioritize our time to help customers sort of relocate from an office, you know, and work in a sort of like a virtual capacity, working from home. So we've seen some really great experiences there of some of our customers that were able to do that. And obviously, cloud is fundamental to, you know, like what Neal was saying in terms of, you know, the large data sets that these projects sort of demand nowadays. It's the only way forward. So it's it's been an interesting experience.
And Stephen, of course, NBS, we launched something just as this started into the cloud, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. So MBS Chorus, the specification solution, now accessible fully from the cloud. So you're not relying on an install on your desktop and fixed licenses to PCs. Now working on a Mac, on a smartphone, through the web browser.
Yeah, and we followed that with Source, so lots and lots of product information that is dynamically linked in with the specification as well.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So that kind of leads us on then to digital and where the future of the industry will be. The digital future of construction is an area where I think we all believe the industry has to go. It's been said it's the least digitized of all the major sectors in the economy. And at the forefront of that now, we have the Centre for Digital Built Britain. Lots of activity. We have investment from government through the sector deal. Neal, do you want to tell us a little bit about what the ambitions are? Because 10 years ago, government launched its BIM initiative, and the question is, are we there yet?
It's a good question. So, so this journey's been a long journey. You know, we've gone through this, you know, lots of hard work has been made in terms of investing in standardization, investing in some of the work that you've been doing in terms of Unicast and those bits and pieces. And there's also the work with government departments about changing how they approach the market. And I think the key message there is, you know, starting to see you're not just buying a physical asset, you're buying a digital one. And we all have to keep in mind that these procurement cycles are very long. So what has been done through the 10 years, all that pre-preparation work, all that convincing, and now we're starting to see those procurement practices change. So I still think we're in the early stages. I know it's been a long journey already, but we're a big, complex industry. So getting through the procurement system has been a key goal. I think over the next couple of years, the mission of CDBB is, one, to get the UK information management framework to be supported by industry by itself. So it's a self-sustaining industry movement, and we're nearly there. I think we're there now. If we look at the work of the UK BIM Alliance, we've set sailed on not just setting up the UK from an information management perspective. Those things have been brought forward into international standards. I think now the next step is about getting into the areas of the market where it supports a lot of the smaller organizations. I think from a tier one perspective, where we're in full flight. I mean, I don't see tenders from organizations without any requirements around information management. Not one. They're all in there. They're all baked in. I think it's now about that cascade through the supply chain, connecting through to suppliers, like we've got Nigel on the call here as well. So
I just want to go to David first, though. David, are you seeing something similar?
Yes, so we're obviously at exactly the opposite end of the market to where Neal's coming from. But we're also seeing every single tender come through with some requirement for BIM and information management. So I think it's going right the way across the board. But I think there's a danger of us developing a sort of almost a two-tier industry in terms of capability. And I think a lot of that is not recognising that the vast majority of what gets built in Britain is built by SMEs and smaller organisations, and an awful lot of the products that are available to do these things are actually targeted at much bigger organisations or large contractors. And the most obvious thing that jumps out at me is common data environment solutions. We have one in the office which we use to collaborate amongst ourselves, as well as working with other peoples, and they're bewilderingly complicated to set up and unwieldy. And we don't have an IT department. So if there's a missed opportunity, and it's something that would make it much more accessible to SMEs, it's almost this idea of products that work straight out of the box, that are set up to work in line with the UK BIM framework, that you can just plug in and play, as opposed to getting this thing that you then have to sort of assemble yourself.
So we're looking something out of the box and not an IKEA box, in other words. Or is it? Because of course, at the other side to that, and we'll come on to it a little bit later, is modular and assembly, but that's a different subject altogether. Nigel, I want to come over to you and just talk about your experience in this.
Well, it is, has been demonstrated by Neal and David, a different side we see totally differently. We were very early adopters, and yet I would nearly say on this, it sort of like it just stopped as far as the push from the manufacturer's side. Now, of course, we had produced lots of BIM objects. We were ready to receive requests, and really our basic information that we provided, maybe it's so good everybody's happy with it. I can't fully imagine that, but it'd be great. But the other worry that we do have, and it was something I remember Stephen told me many years ago when he was explaining the early principles of BIM, was the fact that the way it was seen was that there would be one library and everybody would go into that, which would mean that keeping our information up to date, because we're changing our products and parts of it all the time, then obviously that information has to be up to date. If somebody has a library of our products that they took, say, 2 years ago, well, who's to say that's going to be up to date now? And the other side we have is, whilst we may be early adopters, there's lots around us that aren't, and so we're a system provider, and so often trying to get information from other companies. the first point that often comes to them is when it is the likes of us say, we need you as part of our system to provide this information. So there's still quite a number that is still waiting for the sort of wake up. So I totally agree that there are different levels, and this needs to be trickled down further.
And Vicky, is that's something you see as well? Because you see quite a lot of different implementations of this.
Yeah, I mean, no project has been built on thou shalt produce BIM, and information requirements within themselves. A lot of what I see, and I agree with Neal and David, we always receive information requirements, but sometimes it's a copy and paste of another project, or it's give me BIM, or I want a golden thread, or I like digital twins, and that moves the focus from everything that's important onto a buzzword. And these words are useful for certain things, like being able to put into language what these solutions are. And a golden thread is, if you say to someone who doesn't know the construction industry, what would you think a golden thread is? They'd have a pretty good go at explaining that it's a thread. So what's a digital golden thread of information? Well, it's a thread of information, I imagine, that threads through a project. Yeah. What's a digital twin? It's a digital version of a physical thing. Yeah, there we go. So the language is useful, but when it comes to defining project requirements, it's not useful anymore. And we have to be focusing on what the problems are that we're trying to solve on a project by project basis, rather than saying, I want this buzzword, I want that buzzword. And that's where, and that is why the UK BIM framework have moved away from definitions like BIM level 2 and BIM level 1, that kind of stuff. And it's take these standards, put them into terms that suit your project, and develop information requirements from that. And when you look at information requirements from that point of view, I haven't seen us set those for a very long time.
So where do clients fit in all of this? Are clients the starting point, or are they something that we need to educate, or should clients be pushing? Where does government fit? David, how do you see your clients?
Well, I think you just hit a really important point. If these things are asked for, and they're asked for in an appropriate way, then people can react and respond to it. So I think if you were, say, thinking about a government client, they should follow through and continue to ask for what they started to ask for, and then make sure that it's there afterwards. And that would create an environment where people focus. So what was fantastic about the UK BIM mandate was it gave everyone a clear focus, something to aim at. So whether it's exactly where everyone thought we ought to be going, we're all going roughly in the same direction. We need to keep that that sort of focus. Really, what I think what Vicky's saying really is so important. It's about demystifying and not overcomplicating this, because it isn't that difficult, and it's about defining who's going to do what they're going to do and when they're going to do it. And that's the really important thing, in doing that at the beginning of a project, rather than scrabbling around trying to do it at various stages as projects have been salami sliced up during the procurement process. So the BIM Toolkit's a really important part of that.
So BIM Toolkit is something that we built for government. Crikey, I think that was 2015, and Stephen, this is all part of defining the project, isn't it, and getting that up and running?
Yeah, it is. I'm going to try and use technology to share my screen here. So a digital conference, we'll see if this actually works. So fingers are crossed. And what I'd like to say is also we can see the chat comments and questions come in, so please keep on interacting. We'll deal with them later. But when you look back sort of from where it all started 10 years ago, and then that initial level 2 BIM set of tools, there's the 1192 standards, which moved into the 19650 standards, but where MBS played a small part was developing the classification system, Unicast 2015. And I just thought it was worthwhile just preparing this slide to show and give thanks to the companies that engaged with us over the last 4 or 5 years to continue to improve it. So big client groups, sort of not just buildings as well, but see like water industry, Transport for London, Highways England, and it's been fantastic continuing to improve it, continuing to map it. Got the SFG 20 mappings coming out soon, got NRM1. In terms of using the API and putting the content in software platforms, you go to any BIM conference now and you see the Unicast 2015 codes inside the latest tools that are coming out. And it was initially sort of built and designed for UK and Ireland, but very quickly Australia has now adopted it. And from around the world, these codes are getting used and increasingly pushed. Like, we're in conversations with groups in Japan, Hong Kong, UAE, and also Canada now as well. So I think a big part of that initial level 2 package was the classification, which was part of BIM Toolkit. And it's great to see Unicast 2015 continue to go from strength to strength.
And Neal, I think just building on that, there's further work going on now with Uniclass and starting to map Uniclass into other areas as part of the CDBB projects.
Yeah, so with the connection back to the Construction Innovation Hub and what's called the platform, you know, looking at creating and getting into our modular construction conversation is, you know, structuring product information around delivering on a construction platform. I guess there's two sides of the coin for me. There's, you know, if we're setting up the Amazon of construction, it's the how do we put stuff into a warehouse and be part of a logistics system, and on the other side of that, we need digital platforms to be able to connect customers with those products and get them delivered to the right people at the right time. So it's definitely, and I guess this is, you know, back to the original question you asked me about what's next and what's the ambition. It's, you know, we've got the early foundations of the information management, but the outcomes of that is us being able to enable modern methods of construction.
And I think, Daniel, it's an area that's right at the heart of what Autodesk is trying to do in terms of bringing different platforms together and making kind of a seamless integration between all these different processes. Yeah,
I mean, even if you just come back to the initial question, Richard, if you think about, you know, clients 10 years ago, you know, they're far more educated now to, you know, what is actually acceptable in terms of a standard for projects. And obviously with the technology that's available, you know, there's really no excuses for not embracing digitization. So, you know, obviously with the cloud, you know, this is really helping sort of supply chains overcome some of that. Because coming back to what David was talking about, you know, that two-tiered system, we don't want to really have that in the industry, but you can start to see that already starting to happen. So what I would say is that supply chains are, you know, almost playing catch up, and, you know, the cloud is actually allowing, you know, that bridge to sort of come back together again, because it's that common data environment where you're able to share content and sort of remove some of the risks there. So it's 100% core to our sort of vision.
So what an open question to you all then. What are the barriers to getting this delivered? Because if we go back to the MBS BIM surveys, we've been doing this now for 10 years. We've been tracking the implementation, the usage, and we can see the industry has transformed. If we're to cast forward from 10 years ago, say, could we have done this? Could we have changed the construction industry? People would have laughed. And yet the industry has changed. But as David has already pointed out, not all of the industry yet. There are still sectors of the industry that aren't adopting this. For Nigel, there are still parts of the manufacturing community not seeing those benefits. So what are the barriers, and what can we do? What are we doing to make this industry better and to be that digital industry of the future?
Culture. Absolutely.
Tell me more about culture, Vicky.
I think it's already been pointed out by a couple of people that the technology is there. It might not have been perfected for construction use in some cases, but if we look at other industries, all of the technology that we would need to do what we need to do to digitalize exists. And the biggest barrier that we have is a culture that's being propped up by very interesting procurement methods, lack of accountability and responsibility across the supply chain, clients not actually being held accountable for their own buildings or their own projects. And until we fix that, I think all we're doing is pushing against the closed door. And once that door opens, we will see a massive shift in what we're capable of doing and what we're capable of delivering. And whether that's what Neal says, that's the Amazon version of construction, whether that's us that does that, or whether it's literally Amazon that comes in and says, all right, guys, step aside, we can do this better. It's going to be one of the two over the next 5 years. And we just have to be ready. And, you know, people say, are you worried that someone's going to come in and take your job? Like Amazon will come in and deliver buildings faster and better. It's like, well, I'm not worried because I'll go work for them. But we need other organizations to feel that fear and to feel that responsibility to drive change within themselves. Otherwise, we're not going to get anywhere.
Just if I could expand on that slightly. So I think for those that have heard of the Project 13 work by the Infrastructure Client Group, I think we have to redesign our commercial agreements to share the conversation that we have about risk, because essentially a major root cause of the dysfunction that we have from a commercial system is that we all try and, you know, we're risk phobic and we try and push it on to anybody but ourselves. I think, you know, changing that conversation around sharing the risk, I think that responsibility from a client perspective is more of a shared responsibility. And I think it also links to how, as an industry, we think about data. So a couple of questions that have come up is about information platforms, and someone made a question about the speed of the internet, and, you know, we can't be sharing whole entire projects, and, you know, I can't zip up a whole entire project on my computer, send it on to email to Vicky. It's just not sustainable. You know, there's technology being developed now, and Autodesk are one of the key players in this, where we're looking at, you keep hold of your data and you only transmit the bits that are of interest to the people that need it. So you don't just send them everything, you send them the tiny bits of information that you do need. And that will do two things. One, it will speed it up and we could have faster and better collaboration. But the other interesting outcome from that we'd be thinking about, you know, the value of sending that information out. Is that stream of information worth something? And is that other person willing to pay even a small amount for it? You know, you can imagine if you split up all your transactions into micropayments, they might add up to a decent amount. So it's certainly an interesting road ahead of us from a commercial design perspective.
David, yes, for you.
And I want to sort of go back to Vicky's point, because I think that it's really key, and this cultural thing. And I think it's really difficult for organisations, whether they're designers and contractors, suppliers that are operating on really low margins, to think that R&D to put effort into R&D. But the problem now is really that's what you've got to do in order to survive. And again, counterintuitively, we're going into a challenging economic environment where costs are going to be suppressed even further. And in order to survive, you're going to have to spend even more on R&D. So it's helping organisations get their head around that shift is going to be a bit of a challenge, I think.
I find it really interesting, sorry, just to jump in super quick. A lot of organisations that I've spoken to recently, how the first people to get furloughed during this pandemic have been their L&D, their learning and development, and their communications team. And that just shows how little appreciation we have as an industry for those parts of our businesses. They're the first to go. And it's very ironic thinking our employees are complaining now because we're not communicating to them. Who were the first person we furloughed? Oh, it was our communications team. And there's a real psychological, it's been very interesting watching the way organizations have dealt with furloughs and redundancies over this time.
And I wonder whether that will evolve. So obviously the pandemic and the lockdown happened very quickly indeed. So everyone went into survival mode. As we're beginning to normalize it, we're perhaps going to start to restructure our businesses in a completely different way, and maybe those sorts of people within organisations will come back to the fore. I suspect in the first instance, people were immediately looking at what do we need to do in order to survive the next 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think it was a challenge for every business to manage cash, but you're right. I think in terms of the whole digitization agenda, it does start with culture. For me, it does start with clients. So removing the barriers for those things will make a difference, and we will see the UK continuing its role in leading digitization in construction around the world. I want to go on from digitization generally into something now with a little bit more detail, and that's the post-Grenfell requirements of the new Building Safety Bill. And we've already mentioned a little bit about the golden thread of information. It's said that this will have the biggest transformative effect on the construction industry in a generation. I think one of the first questions for me is, do you think the industry knows about this? How well known are the requirements, the new provisions, the new processes that the Building Safety Bill actually envisages? I'm going to start with you again, Vicky, because I know you're quite involved here.
Yeah, so I've been doing some work with the CIOB. We've done a mass survey, essentially, of industry, which is still live. It's goldenthread.co.uk. On industry capability and capacity to deliver the golden thread requirements. And that came from really a conversation that I was having with someone about the fact that this bill was being put into place. It was originally beginning of 2021. The draft bill is out now. And it was, I felt like I was about to be blindsided by it. And I'm relatively active in the industry, in the digital side of things. So I was thinking, if I don't know about it, who else does? And the idea is that, so we've been teed up now with the government's own research team. We're going to be feeding back the results at the end of the year. But overwhelmingly, what we've got back so far is that people completely understand why this is going to be a requirement. 100%, no doubt about that. They're 100% willing to get involved and try and improve health and safety through better information management. But what they don't understand is what they actually have to do themselves, where they go to get that information, and who ultimately is responsible for implementing this at a project level. So it's a really interesting piece of research, and like I say, it's open. The survey's open till the end of August. So.
So let's find out a little bit about what that is, Stephen. In terms of the golden thread itself, how do we explain that to people?
Yeah, well, I've got another slide here that I'm going to pop up, but the draft Building Safety Bill talks about gateways where decisions have got to be captured digitally and people have got to be accountable for them, and they've got to prove that the design of the building meets the building regulations. So I've got a short little slide here, but it simplifies things, maybe oversimplifies things. But before a building is going to be built, you can look down the plans and the specification and see that it meets the requirements. You can physically check that and take accountability for that decision. Then you can do that again at the point where a building's about to start and check, for example, the fire performance meets or exceeds at least, even for manufacturers being substituted, especially on the substitution. Someone's got to take accountability for the substitution. Somebody's got to document and check that. And then again, finally, before the building's occupied. And obviously the Building Safety Bill looks at the approved documents covering things like fire and the sort of structural safety. But it's not just about that when you put buildings together, it's about all of the building regulations for things like inclusive design, accessibility, and it's also about checking it against client requirements. And I think the industry for too long has not captured these decisions in a structured, standardized way, so that you hit the end of a project and you're in the operations phase and you can't check, can I replace this with this? Does it meet what it was designed to produce? And I think capturing this sort of thing, and I know this is oversimplified, digitally, so you can check a gateway against another gateway and give it that green tick and sign your name at the bottom to say, yes, that decision is the right decision. That's what's got to be put in place, especially on these projects where it's tall buildings where there are dwellings.
And David, are you seeing this already? Because I think you do an awful lot in this area, in the housing world.
Yeah, so we're like everyone, struggling to understand it, but at the same time, we think we can sort of see where the way forward is, and it may well be that it's this that ultimately drives the adoption of building information modeling anyway, and it's that idea of being very structured and organized about how you produce your information and validate it and check it at different stages. And this current environment's just really highlighted the importance of that, made it very sort of super real, brought it into focus. So an important part of this is to leverage the power of the common data environment and embed process in that to ensure that these checks happen at the different stages.
And Daniel, in terms of Autodesk, you're really quite keen on that whole workflow as well.
Yeah, because I mean, it's all about connected data, because, you know, in terms of what Vicky was saying around accountability, if we haven't got an audit trail and, you know, almost like a clear view of what's happened, when and by who, you know, this is obviously a huge risk for lots of organizations. So by having a common data environment, you know, where something sits in the cloud and you can access it from multiple devices, there's really no excuses for sort of having that within a project environment. Obviously, you know, there's a few challenges around, you know, where some people might not be able to access that within a particular way, but it's fundamental to addressing some of these concerns, and obviously the building safety of the asset itself. So it's fundamental to the process.
But not everything goes swimmingly when we change things. Nigel, unintended consequences.
Yeah, I was going to say that the biggest thing here is substitution. Now, you'd always expect a manufacturer, especially a system manufacturer, to say that, but I can't tell you the number of times we deal with clients where they talk to us about issues that they've had, and it's miles away from what we'd originally specified because nobody checked it all the way through. We can only work on the requirements that are given. We can often try and anticipate and forewarn, but in the end, we have to deal with what we're being requested for. You know, the other side of it is the fact that it doesn't help the other angle here. The call back from to the golden thread was Grenfell, and some of the outcomes of that were the government having a knee-jerk reaction to banning certain components, which if you go to Scotland, you see a totally more sensible way of looking things. And the reason why this causes a problem is you would think as a flat roofing company we're exempt from the ban, and yet I spend probably 70% of my time I think dealing with issues of unintended consequences. So we do see that the way this is going to affect us as manufacturers is provision of information. And of course, everybody's very good at telling you what they can do. You don't see so often what you can't do. And in the end is the fact that that's the way that you're sometimes going to be more able to see the pitfalls of what Stephen was showing, where you end up with a product that you thought was fine, and at the last minute, one of the key properties is less than is expected. Providing key information, and of course a working group will have to be a what's key, and a lot of that comes in what we put in our BIM objects. We need to do more on that side, and then the other side of it is something that certainly our part of the industry is quite familiar with, is we have high quality products, we design, give design input, and then we check what's done. So we have site inspectors. Now that's a process that we've had in the sort of flat roofing industry for quite a long time. I don't see how many other industries will be able to continue without that sort of process. So that's a major thing that is coming down the line for a lot of manufacturers. some of us have already been there, but it's not so much of a revelation for some as it is for others.
Yeah, I've been fortunate enough, if that's the word, to go through the documentation around the bill. And what comes through clearly for me is that there's 4 real areas of focus. One is construction products and creating a new register of products, actually, which is on the way. Manufacturers and how they describe their products is going to be fundamental. And to me, that's specification. The next one is around collaboration and these new duty holders and the requirements for the duty holders to work together, to share information. And that links back the information connectivity we've all talked about common data environments, the process, responsibility, accountability, recording. But there's some real stings in the tail here. One is around building control and big changes coming to approved inspectors, etc. So 2 new roles and registers coming there, and also architects. Architects get a particular focus in this new bill, and particularly around CPD and lifelong learning. That gets back to where Vicky was in terms of learning, training and development. So this bill has a huge potential impact on how we all work. Initially just on high-risk residential buildings over 18 meters. That will come down to about 11 meters at some point in the future. So it really is something that we all will have to focus on. I'm sure there'll be an awful lot more comes out of this. I'd encourage you to work with CIOB and the research they're doing around this. But I just do want to talk a little bit more about this BIM level 1 that is in the documentation. The requirement for this golden thread is BIM level 1 and COBie. I don't understand how that's going to work. Can anybody help me on this one?
That probably just needs some clarification. It's something that has been fed back to the bill writers already. It's something that has been highlighted as moving focus away from the actual problem. I mean, the fact of the matter is, a golden thread of information, or collecting the data and information that you need to ensure a building is constructed and maintained safely, can be done on Excel. I mean, it's not ideal, but the fact of the matter is, a huge focus of the original report from Judith Hackett was on using technology that's already available to you. So we don't need to blindside anyone with sexy new scary technology. And by referencing BIM and specific tools and COBie, it sort of moves the focus away from health and safety and good information management. And I think that the next step as well is the common data environments. A lot of the ones that we have are based on old document management systems, which means that they're file-based systems. When actually, once we move into the proper use of Unicast classifications or other classification systems, and attributing decisions made to assets throughout the life cycle of a process, you cannot. That is then when you start to struggle with files and folders, and you have to start looking at things from an elemental level. So I think, yes, BIM is the way to go, but I think specifying any kind of level of BIM or any kind of requirement at this stage is a bit of a mistake.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that, because I think there's also we've moved the language forward from a BIM perspective. It's information management frameworks, and the levels aren't really applicable now, which I think is really useful, because there's none of this sort of vendor competition, level 1, 2, 3 to level N argument. There's one framework, and this is how we're going to talk about it. I think one of the things I'm keen, if I had one message to that group, it would be, let's have a look. I've been working with the health and safety executive about the data that they hold about incident, where incidents have gone wrong. If we, the way that it's specified today, we're going to end up with the same with what the HSE has got, is a big database of where things gone wrong. Nobody can access it. And no, it's not a knowledge management system at all. It's just a repository of where things have gone wrong, and it doesn't feed back into the design process. So I think if they could follow the lead of the HSE in terms of, one, recognizing then that they don't have just a data set of things that have gone wrong. Actually, if you look at it from a systemic perspective, it's a knowledge management system, and don't have it as a static document that you'd only look at when things go wrong. We want to stop things from going wrong progressively. So focus it as a knowledge management system, not just as a repository of stuff through a golden thread.
So we'll see how this progresses. It is a draft bill, so it's got a number of stages to go through, but certainly this is going to be one of the big changes for the industry. And as David mentioned, I think this is the way that BIM will be pushed into so many other areas. The last thing for us to cover off is looking at the environmental crisis and how digital can help us in terms of our sustainability and creating sustainable environments going forward. How does digital help us in that sustainable world? David, in terms of your designing, how often are you led by your clients to say this is important to us?
It's very often there, but it's going to be anecdotal as opposed to data-driven or information-driven and defined. And I wonder whether the challenge or the opportunity that we've got coming is the idea of being able to evidence-base decisions in order to drive more sustainable solutions. And that the one thing that I've often have in my mind is this idea that we're in a low-cost construction environment. If perhaps to get public funding for a government-funded project, you had to produce a 30-year life cycle cost analysis of the building, that would change how we put the building together. So again, it's that sort of maybe there's a procurement or political shift that could help drive a different approach.
Yeah, Neal, do you see something similar? Is this something that's on the agenda for CIH or CDBB?
Absolutely. We have project work streams around Gen Zero, creating the next generation of publicly procured buildings that are going to be net zero carbon. So definitely a yes. And I agree with David. You cannot, one, create a 30-year projection on the performance of a building without using any form of simulation. That also creates a benchmark for us to be able to build a commercial model against, because if you can't create an incentive to, there's one thing to design for 30 years, there's another thing to deliver for that performance over 30 years. And those things are being looked at, and it sort of goes back to the Project 13 thing, is looking at how can we have commercial frameworks that connect you back to outcomes and performance, and sharing the success of it happening, not just throwing ownership over the fence.
So, Stephen, where do we go with all of this? What's MBS's view?
Okay, I want to do a quick share on this one. So I think there's three things really. The first is defining what you mean by sustainability, and I've got to just put a shout out to the work that the Royal Institute of British Architects have done, where they looked at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and then they defined the RIB as sustainable outcomes, which were aligned to the work at the UN. And yes, it's about net zero, but that's not the only thing when it comes to sustainability. It's around embodied carbon, it's about use of water, sustainable connectivity, the transport network, ecology of the land around. So if you're just concentrated on net zero buildings, but they're in the middle of nowhere and they destroy the environment and use loads of water, etc., destroy communities, that's not sustainable. So you define what you mean by sustainability, then put metrics that can be checked digitally against them. So against each one of these, what are the metrics that you've got to measure? What are MBS doing? Sustainability goes throughout our template content and our guidance in our generic spec. And what we're doing on our manufacturer platform, NBS Source, is making sure that when we talk to our manufacturers and upgrade their data, that we're extracting this information and making it really accessible. So you can go to a manufacturer's product and find out whether it contains asbestos, where it was manufactured, what's the guidance on recyclability, embodied carbon, and make it very easy for the manufacturers to provide that to the industry. So there's a big challenge ahead, but I think the RIBA have done some fantastic work, and it's important to us at NBS, and we know our customers as well.
So we've got one of the comments is that just working from home and not traveling is helping on our sustainable objectives, of course. But what about other new procurement methods and things like modular, offsite, design for manufacture, etc.? David, is that an area where you're focused?
We've been doing some projects in that field, and I wonder whether there's something that perhaps links the previous conversation around the golden thread with sustainability and off-site, which is the idea of, instead of specifying products, actually specifying systems that we already know go together, that are quality controlled and, really importantly, certified as being compliant. Because I think one of the big challenges people are going to have at the moment is assembling things without necessarily knowing how they all go together. So this idea that we move towards a more sort of quality control platform design, you can see how it potentially solves lots of the problems that we're talking about. The challenge again is that it involves innovation and change, and we're going into an economic environment where those things are going to be, lots of money isn't going to be available for the R&D, and people are going to be nervous about. So we need to sort of find a way of sort of motivating ourselves to make that shift, because it's definitely the way of achieving better, more assured outcomes.
I think there's two telescopes to look down in terms of an integration. So, David, as an architect, has a system level that integrates a building into a broader system in terms of where it sits in a community and how it connects to other pieces of linear infrastructure, for example, and how does the commercial scope of that change, and David's role as an integrator changes at that macro level. But then on the other side is, looking at Nigel, is how far does his product go as a system? You go from flat roofs, like how far through the integration, I don't want to say maturity, it's not a maturity at all. It's the sort of what level of that system do you want to integrate into your business? Are you going to extend into modular construction where you have a roofing system that includes your product, and what structural elements do you start pulling into your product? And I think we're going to see those lines starting to move. I know that, for example, Travis Perkins as a builder's merchant, looking at how it's not just about selling bricks, it's building sub-assemblies. What sub-assemblies can they put together in their yards that they're not just putting the raw materials onto the back of trucks? There's sub-assemblies that are going onto the back of the trucks. And I think we're going to start seeing that coming from, if we're going to see that coming from building merchants, we're going to start seeing that have an interesting impact in terms of, the role of smaller contractors in that space, for example.
Yeah, and very large product suppliers who can pull everything together in one system. And
that's as product manufacturers, is the fact that I laughed when I mentioned about system as opposed to product, because what I'm always banging on about is the and in the end you have to, because if you start breaking it down, is the fact that all those different components don't always necessarily make good bedfellows. And then you have strange scenarios where you're mixing from a sustainability something that's very good to something that's terrible, or from a fire point of view something that's good that's to terrible. Yet when you look at it as a system, it may have to be looked at with different eyes. And so I think one of the important things is making sure that we can record all the right sort of information. So again, just touching on sustainability, what a number of sustainability groups, experts that I sit with, their complaint always is you're asking all the wrong questions. You've got the wrong data. We as experts can't make any judgments on that. So we need to know what those key points are. And then we have things like, for product manufacturers, environmental product declarations. Well, there's still, again, half the industry that has never asked or doesn't have one. And so, and even if it is that somebody asks for that, it's usually to tick a box. It's not to actually read what's in it and actually make an informed decision. So we are very much still in the carrot and stick approach on that side, but it's better than nothing at all. It's just maybe the stick needs to be used a bit more.
Well, I think it's interesting because I saw Vicky nodding away when we talked about systems and about certification. So something that MBS also believes in our specification tools do that I know with Autodesk as well. It's about pulling all of these things together and making sure that data flows through the workflow. I think it's been really interesting discussions and common themes coming through all 4 points that we've talked about in our session today. I know there have been questions that have been raised, and we'll come back to those questions. So what we'll do, as we do with all of our webinars, we'll put up a list of those questions and the answers that we have to those, so you'll be able to come back onto the mbs.com and find out the answers to the questions we just didn't have time to cover in the session today. You'll also be able to come back and look again at this presentation. We might even break it up into pieces so you can pick out just little areas that are interesting. So do come back to the website and find out about those things. I just want to finish by saying thank you to our panel. That has been a really interesting discussion. Hopefully you've got just as much out of it as I have, and the people watching these sessions have as well. So thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you all again in the future.
Cheers.